My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Yes, good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM. You're listening to LGBTQ Live with myself, Mick FitzGerald. And today we've got a very interesting programme for you. Because we're going to be welcoming in the studio Mick Quinlan. Now, Mick is he's a legendary figure in LGBT circles, particularly in Dublin, but throughout Ireland as well, because Mick is best known for setting up the Gay Men's Health Project all those years ago. So I'm going to welcome our guest into the studio, Mick Quinlan. Mick, welcome to Dublin City FM and welcome to LGBT Live.
Thank you.
Mick, I was just praising your efforts before you came into the studio. The Gay Men's Health Project. Now, I suspect the genesis of that goes back to the 80s, when really, for anybody who was around in the LGBT community, and it doesn't matter whether it was in Ireland or where it was a very dark period, wasn't it?
Well, the 80s, particularly the middle 80s, yes.
Yes.
It was for lots of people, for LGBT. I mean, if people remember the 80s, we lost a case around decriminalisation, Morris case. There was the divorce referendum, and then there was the abortion referendum. They were all lost. And then HIV or AIDS at the time, and then there was discrimination in the prisons, and so there was a whole range of stigma related,
Sure.
AIDS related stigma, and but then HIV, when they found out that it was a HIV that was caused rather than HCIV3, so things start progressing then, because the Gay Health Network, the Gay Health Action, we set that up in January 1985.
Was it that early?
Yeah, and we were the first HIV/AIDS group in Ireland, and then of course we have set up other ones. But the important thing is that the community actions and the activism really began around then. Then you had AIDS Action Alliance, the AIDS Helpline, which we helped found, and then they became later Dublin AIDS Alliance, HIV Ireland, and Cork AIDS Alliance. The Gay Men's Health Service, which was the Gay Men's Health Project, was established in 1993 in the Health Board.
Sure.
And that was before decriminalisation. Now I was helped set it up with others, and then I became the manager. But I'm now retired from that, believe it or not. But I'm still actively involved in Gay Health Network, and that's who I'm kind of representing today around promoting the IMA survey.
Yeah. Can I just step back a bit, Mick, because you and I are roughly the same vintage. Now, I wasn't living in Ireland in the 80s, I was living in Australia, and I can remember when it almost started off as a bit of a whisper, in the sense of, and I'm talking about HIV/AIDS here now, is that my memory is by about 1980, 1981, the LGBT scene, particularly in Sydney, was flourishing. It was it had come out of the closet. It was colourful. It was noisy, and it was attracting the right sort of publicity. Then what we called AIDS came along, and nobody quite knew what it was at the time. Now, I don't know how it happened, how it played out here, but certainly in the where I was, you were getting a lot of, all I would call it is forces of reaction. And it was, this is a gay plague and they deserve what they get. Because before that, you had all the standard discriminations, but this was something different. And the responses I was seeing both in media and politics was extraordinary. It was almost medieval to a certain degree. How did it play out here, Mick? Was it confusion?
Well, I think because the time now, we haven't got much time today in a way. Yeah. It's a long history, and but we have to remember that. That when AIDS came along, it wasn't called AIDS initially, and but it was gay. The scientists and the doctors labelled it as a gay-related
Indeed.
disease, and that immediately set up the issue around discrimination and stigma. And then when it was changed to AIDS, it was still saw as a gay disease, and then of course with intravenous drug users. So the whole, and with people's fear and not knowing, and then the whole homophobic attitude. So of course it led to further discrimination. But in a country like in Ireland, where the whole gay scene was completely underground, the LGBT scene, this was an added pressure. This was an added thing that had to be dealt with. And of course part of it was the lack of information and knowledge. And so, because that's where the fear is built up as well. So part of between 80 and 85, like some of us knew because we were involved in the Dublin Lesbian and Gay Men's Collectives, the NLGF at the time, and a few of us who were who we came together and we said, look, we'll have to do something because the information not getting out. So that's what we did. But it was in a climate of complete oppression, in a way then that people, you had immigration that was related around people's sexuality, but as I said, there's also links to the climate in the population around divorce and abortion and all that.
Well, that's something I'm interested in your memory, Mick. I don't want to labour this one too long, but my memory of the time was you started to get information on a personal level before you started to get information on what I would call on a societal level. So we would hear, oh, did you hear Roy's got all these blotches on his face, or somebody else died, and it filtered through the LGBT community before it started to make it into the mainstream. Was that the way it was here, Mick, or had Ireland identified it from elsewhere before?
Well, you see, there was people, and it was known, and then some famous people or some people's friends.
Rock Hudson was probably the first, wasn't he?
But you see, this is in a climate where you wouldn't have known there was that many people in Ireland. So what we did as from a political point of view and an activist point of view was we knew that if we didn't do something, it would become worse. Yeah. So it was the setting up of the Gay Health Action in 1985 and producing the information, getting funding from the government at the time, even though initially we got some funding to do a leaflet, and then because homosexuality was a criminal act, they couldn't fund it anymore. So there was all of those impediments. But at the same time, all those things didn't stop us. And it was we had the age-related stigma related to gay and bisexual men, but we also had intravenous drug users, because whole parts of Dublin and in communities there was widespread illness and death. You know.
Well, that was one thing I found interesting. I came back here in about originally 92, and then I came back to stay in 95 or thereabouts, so that'd be a more familiar timescale with it. And what struck me when I was living in Australia, the vast majority of people that had AIDS were gay men, no question about that. But when I came back here, that wasn't necessarily the case, that there was a huge amount of HIV drug users. That wasn't the situation in Australia. Now, since then, we've discovered that probably, which is what we're going to talk about today, is that not everybody that identifies as heterosexual is quite that way, or so on and so forth. Was there any Mick, was there any official stigma in that sense of the word, or was there any politicising of it? Because what I remember once over there, one of the worst cases, there was a Christian minister who was also a member of Parliament in the state Parliament, and he was calling for people who had AIDS, who were usually gay, to be put on an island, in the same way that they would put lepers on an island. Was any of that here?
Well, I mean, remembering back and thinking back, and it's recorded, there was elements of discrimination that was harder was aimed at some people more than others. Mm-hmm. For instance, in the prisons, there was segregation, towards people who had AIDS. Mm-hmm. But but thinking about it, we didn't. In one way, we didn't have the same amount of anti-gay or HIV-related stigma. People calling for this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Now there were some. I think what happened was that it was getting the information out. Now I think it's very hard to say something is official or not official, but what definitely is, there was a reluctance on some people's part around dealing with the issue around homosexuality and bisexuality, and also equating them, because some people were equating sex with death.
Yeah.
And then that was the gays. Then there was drugs and AIDS, and then, but what no one was dealing with was the whole issue around sexuality per se, or recognising that AIDS or HIV was a sexually transmitted infection that could infect anyone. You know, so that was the stepping stone. That was what the groups kept pushing at. Now, it wasn't a takeaway from the severe trauma. And also that was happening to the gay community, because people have lost friends, hundreds of men have died in a silent, underground way.
Indeed.
And the way people couldn't even talk about how someone died, you know, and HIV-related stigma, or age-related stigma, still exists to this day.
Yeah. Was there segregation in hospitals? Because again, this was one of the issues I wasn't terribly impressed with when I visited a friend in a Sydney hospital, and it was like going into a horror movie in that sense of the word. That people they had very physical symptoms.
But I think in this time, because now we are where we are. I mean, in a historical sense, some of these things happened, and part of it happened because people didn't know, or people didn't know how it was exactly spread. Because when it was called gay-related an infection, people actually thought you could get it from touching someone.
Yeah.
And some people still do, or that it's tired to see all that.
Drinking pints
So,
in the same glass and all of that stuff.
So fear and homophobia and all that spreads across society, so in different areas. But what I would look at is that what the advances we have made up to now.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm here to promote the IMA survey that we want. What we want with the IMA survey is it's a European sexual health and practices survey. Is to encourage men out there who have sex with other men who maybe identify as gay or bisexual, but who do not identify as gay or bisexual, to go on to imis2017.eu and complete the survey. We've done this before, like in 2010, 180,000 men across Europe completed the survey, and over 2,300 in Ireland. And then we did the Missy in 2015, and 3,000 men completed. So this is now 2017. And the information we get back from that, we can show and we can highlight the people's knowledge, people's practice, but we can also highlight our men who have sex with men who don't, men who have sex with men, are they experiencing HIV-related stigma or homophobic attacks? And so they're kind of all interlinked.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting you should extend it to that degree, because when I read the title of the press release that was put out, it said 1 in 10 men have sex with men who do not identify as gay or bisexual. And I thought to myself, well, big deal. To me, the label is not important. It's the practice that's important in itself. You can call people queer. It doesn't really matter what you call them. Would you accept that it's the practice that people get involved in? That's where the risk comes from, and that's in essence what your surveys are trying to identify.
Well, it's a survey, yes. A survey is trying to identify, or is trying to encourage people to take part. We know in Ireland and in other countries, gay and bisexual men do engage with surveys, and particularly then we're trying to reach those men, for whatever reason, don't identify. They don't have to identify.
No, you don't anymore, do you?
And that's not what this is asking them. It's asking them, are you engaged in sex with a man, and what do you do? And are you... Particularly then we can gauge the knowledge that they have, and then it also helps us to have campaigns where we can target where we need to target certain messages. Is it certain parts of Ireland? Is it a certain communities? Like, we have to remember in the LGBT, particularly the gay and bisexual men community, the vast changes now, because a huge percentage are not born in Ireland, are from many other countries.
Okay, that's interesting.
And including a huge proportion who come from Latin America. So the whole scene has changed, and taking that into account then is also language. So not only do we have to deal with the fact that some people might want stuff in Irish, but now we have to deal with other languages. So we have the last surveys helped us set up the mantoman.ie, where you can get comprehensive information around sexual health and support. And that's also now available in 4 languages, 4 key languages. It's available in English, French, Spanish and Portuguese for the Brazilian. So it's a huge resource for men out there who are having sex with other men if they want to get information, and also friends of men. So that if anyone didn't do anything else, try to fill the survey, go to imis2017.eu or mantoman.ie.
Yeah. What are we finding then, Mick? Are we finding that people's level of knowledge is as we would expect, or people's level of knowledge, depending on certain demographic criteria, is deficient?
From previous surveys, we know that there's different needs in different age groups and different education levels. Depending on people's education levels, or their ethnic, or their background, their country background, and their ethnic background. So what we're able to do is, with this, along with we evaluate the stuff we do on mantoman.ie, we can say where the gaps are and where we can target something more. Now, what we have done, and what we did do from previous surveys, because we found out that there was a lack of access to condoms, a lack of access to testing, that we've increased that. So now there's a bigger increase, there's a bigger access to free condoms, there's a bigger access to testing. Now all of that can be built on, and that's what this survey and other surveys help us to do.
Yep. We've spoken quite a bit at the beginning, Mick, about HIV/AIDS, but in the days before HIV/AIDS was, publicly in our consciousness, I can remember that gay men, particularly, having jaundice and hepatitis, was quite common. And it was almost like seen as this was an occupational hazard. I presume that this survey, we are looking at identifying perhaps a range of activities that would potentially could bring people into a range of risks, as we say.
Well, there's indications, or people are asked, have they tested for this, that or the other, other STIs. I mean, we have, because the way society, the way things are happening, in a way the HIV figures are high, but they're levelling off a bit. But the figures for gonorrhea, for instance, are increasing, or syphilis. So all of those things we need to be aware of. The issue around yellow jaundice or hepatitis, to a different degree has changed, and because of the services like the STI service around the country and the Gay Men's Health Service, a huge proportion of gay and bisexual men and other men who don't identify as gay but have been vaccinated for against hepatitis A and B. Now, and hepatitis A would be the one more associated, where you would say yellow jaundice, and it's more easy. Hepatitis A can also be occupational. It can be, hygienic spread. So it's not just a sexually transmitted infection. So these, all of these things are part of a whole makeup of if people are sexually active, that they need awareness, that they need to know you can get this, that or the other. But the most important thing is that they need to know they can go somewhere to get tested and get it for free.
An interesting one, you've talked about hepatitis A and B. When we go back to the mid-80s, hepatitis C wasn't even identified. It was known as hepatitis non-A or B. Now, I contracted hepatitis C. I could give you any sort of speculation as to how I might have done it, but I would have said a lot of, we used to call it fun boys disease. In other words, it was related to lifestyle in that sense of the word. Is it too narrow to be just focusing on sexual practices and not, if you like, be focusing on the foreplay that goes into it, because let's be honest here, Mick, certainly in my experience and social experience, there's a lot of drugs taken in the HIV community, and that lowers your guard to a certain degree. So do we need to look at the interaction between sexual practices and social lifestyle?
In the context of sexual health, that's what we do.
Okay.
We're looking at it across the terms. I mean, even in this survey and previous surveys, we are asking about drug use and types of drugs used. I mean, I suppose the headline issues would be around chemsex and the drugs, and so this will highlight some of that. We do know that there's a number of men who are into different types of drugs when they're having sex or before they're having sex, and then then there's other issues around alcohol and mixing alcohol with drugs, etc., etc. Now there is information out there. That's why I say man to man and all that. There's a comprehensive information source around drugs, around Hep C, around hepatitis A, hepatitis B. And you're right. I mean, I suppose the issue is how people or where people pick up. So you can, like, what's safe for HIV is not necessarily safe for hepatitis or for other STIs.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the thing where we, they're the fine things that we need to be getting out to people, and we do that through the love bugs information, the G cards, the chemsex cards. And the other thing around chemsex then, of course, is people going under, so they need to know where to go, what hospital to go to, and all of that. And I suppose part of the other thing that we're learning is the effects of some of the drugs, the addictive aspects of some of the drugs.
Of course, yes.
So there's all of those supports we're trying to build up on.
Well, just coming back, Mick, to come back to HIV/AIDS and hepatitis C. To me, both of these are blood-transmitted diseases. Essentially, they are.
Well,
now,
also.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Now, when I went to when I was identified as having being a carrier of hepatitis C, and I went through the all the program up at Beaumont. And then they asked me, how do you think you got it? And I'm thinking, well, you should be asking me how I'm feeling. But I wasn't somebody who you would have said, well, he's likely to get that because he was using needles, or he's likely to get that because he was doing unsafe practices. Now, when I said it to them, that I used to go to a lot of parties where people shared notes, they had never heard of that before. And I said, that's quite a possibility as to how, okay, it's not the exciting way or the sexy way that you were thinking of it, but this is more likely. Now, they had never even considered that at the time. Now, the reason why I raise it is that it's 10 years since I went through the Hep C program. Touch wood. Cocaine is a lot more prevalent in Ireland now than it was, say, 10 years ago. And I'm just wondering, is there a bit of a hidden danger there in that sense of the word? Do people go to parties, here, have a note, have a line sort of thing? And is that a flag we should be waving, Mick?
Well, you see, it already is. And I was talking about the drugs information. All of those, I mean, on the man-to-man, on the Illifi Drugs Project, on the Emergency Key, on drugs.ie, there is comprehensive information around different aspects, and particularly around snorting and sharing works, etc. I suppose part of the awareness around drugs is you can be saying so much to people all the time, but hopefully within the schooling system, with the education system, I know the USI try to do with students is to continually get the information out, just to forewarn people. After that, when people are in different situations, they really have to make a decision for themselves. Now,
and have their friends looking out for them as well.
Well, we do know in some areas around chemsex parties, for instance, there is that. Some people do look after each other, But of course, there's means and ways. I suppose if people think back when we set up the needle exchanges in the late 80s, in 89, in the Resource Centre, and now there's a number of needle exchanges, you would wonder, is there still a need for more? You know, so there's a whole aspect that, and I know there's, for instance, HIV Ireland are running the testing, STI testing in the north, up in Louth, and it's in association with a needle exchange there. So there are kind of things happening.
It's a hell of a lot better than it was, isn't it? Compared to those dark days we alluded to at the very beginning.
I think what's happening is we're getting more information out. There's a national sexual health strategy. We work closely with this sexual health crisis pregnancy. There's this IMIS survey is like a partnership with the sexual health crisis pregnancy and HPSC and ourselves. So it's doing that to get the resources to continue to provide in services. I would encourage, if anyone is listening, if they're worried about anything, just go on to mantoman.ie, and then if anyone is out there who has sex with a man who's male, go to imis2017.eu.
Just one last piece, Mick, because a lot of people of what I would call 35 and above are probably, they grew up with this, and people of our generation, where we've learned it the hard way to a certain degree. What about the school age generation now? Is this message getting in there, and is it getting in a formalised way?
I can't answer all about it, but I do know they try to deal with something through relationships and sexuality in the schools. Whether it's adequate or not, I think that is another issue. I think that there are issues around. I suppose I personally think there's issues around men and sexuality, young men per se. So if part of dealing with masculinity issues and then sexuality issues, I do think that when someone is 18 and or whatever age they leave school or second level, that they should be provided with something like a card and all that saying, this is all the knowledge we've tried to give you, but if you want further knowledge, this is where to go. So they're equipped with something. Yeah,
Mick, we're going to unfortunately have to finish here because we could continue on for hours. I just want to say, the work you're doing, it's been recognised, particularly at Pride a couple of years ago. You're a legend in this area, and as I say, Ireland owes you a massive debt. And I just wanted to say, you and we have a mutual friend, or had a mutual friend. It's the 10th anniversary of his passing, Noel Walsh.
Oh, right.
What a great man, wasn't he? Yeah.
We mark it every year with the Gael Forum. So
Look, that's it for today's LGBT Life. I want to thank Mick Quinlan for doing such a great job around men's sexual health. I want to thank Owen Fitzpatrick for doing a terrific job in the desk. I'm Mick Fitz. We'll be back in a week's time. You take care.
Thanks.
World that I want to have a little pride in, my world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.